The air inside St. Augustine's Church was heavy with the scent of old wood and melted wax, the kind of stillness that seemed to hold secrets in its shadows. It was a cold November night in 1993, in a small town in upstate New York, where the wind howled like a mourner outside the stained glass windows. Father Daniel Callahan, a priest known for his quiet demeanor and piercing eyes, sat alone in the confessional, waiting for the last parishioner of the evening. The wooden booth creaked as he shifted, his fingers tracing the worn edge of his prayer book. Then a sound, a faint rasping whisper, slithered through the lattice screen. "Forgive me, Father," it began, "for I have sinned." The voice was wrong. It wasn't human. It was too hollow, too brittle, like leaves crumbling underfoot. Father Callahan froze, his heart hammering. The voice spoke again, confessing a crime so chilling it seemed to drain the warmth from the church itself. A murder decades old, buried in the town's forgotten history. The details were vivid, too vivid, describing a body hidden where no one would look, a life snuffed out in silence. But what made Father Callahan's blood run cold wasn't the confession itself. It was the name the voice gave. Margaret Hensley, a woman who had died in 1962. Her grave marked in the churchyard he passed every day. The whisper lingered, as if the confessional itself was holding its breath. Father Callahan's mind raced. Was this a prank? A delusion? Or something far worse, something that clawed at the edges of reason? He stumbled out of the booth, his lantern casting wild shadows on the stone walls, but the other side of the confessional was empty. No one was there, yet the voice had been real as the sweat now beading on his forehead. That night, Father Callahan couldn't shake the feeling that he had brushed against something unholy, something that had crossed a line no living soul should cross. He didn't know then that this was only the beginning, that the confessions would keep coming, night after night, from voices that belonged to the dead, each one unraveling a piece of a mystery that would consume him. What kind of mind could hear the dead and still hold on to sanity? What kind of truth could lie behind confessions that should never have been spoken? This is the story of Father Daniel Callahan, a man who stood at the edge of the divine and the damned, a priest who heard secrets that weren't meant for the living, until he himself became part of the mystery. What you're about to discover will make you question the boundaries of life, death, and the human soul. Could a man of faith be drawn into a darkness so deep it defies explanation? Could the dead truly speak? Or was something else at play? Something that used their voices to lure him toward a truth too terrifying to face? Stay with us, because the answers will shake you to your core. This case isn't just about a priest or a church. It's about the fragility of the human mind when it confronts the impossible. It's about how even the most steadfast among us can be broken by truths that don't belong in our world. Father Callahan's story reveals how close we all are to the edge, how a single moment can pull us into a spiral where morality blurs, and the line between reality and nightmare vanishes. It's a reminder that some secrets are buried not because they're forgotten, but because they're too dangerous to unearth. If you're ready to dive into this chilling mystery, hit that like button to help others uncover the dark truths hidden in stories like these. In the comments, let us know you're ready by saying, "I'm ready to discover the truth about this story." By doing so, you're joining a community of truth seekers, those brave enough to peer into the shadows and question what lies beyond. Thank you for being here, for daring to explore the inexplicable with us. Prepare yourself, because what comes next contains a key revelation that will forever change the way you see the human mind. The next morning, Father Daniel Callahan woke with the taste of dread still lingering, as if the air itself had thickened overnight. St. Augustine's Church stood silent under a gray November sky in 1993, its steeple cutting into the low clouds like a warning. He hadn't slept. The voice from the confessional, the one that claimed to be Margaret Hensley, had clawed its way into his thoughts, replaying every word of her confession. She had spoken of a murder, not her own, but one she claimed to have witnessed in 1958. A young man, Thomas Reed, beaten and left in a shallow ditch behind the old mill on the edge of town. The details were precise, too precise. She described the way the moonlight caught the blood on the grass, the sound of the mill's wheel creaking as it turned. Indifferent to the violence below, she named the killer a man called Henry Carver, a local handyman who had died in a car accident in 1970. But Margaret's voice had trembled with something more than fear. Guilt, as if she carried a piece of the crime herself. Father Callahan sat at his desk in the rectory, the weak light of a desk lamp casting shadows across his worn Bible. He tried to rationalize it. A prankster, perhaps, someone who knew the town's history and wanted to torment him, but the voice hadn't sounded like it belonged to anyone living. It was too thin, too brittle, like a wind passing through cracked bones. He decided to check the church records, hoping to find something, anything that could anchor him back to reality. The parish archives were a maze of dusty ledgers, their pages yellowed and curling. He found her name. Margaret Hensley, born 1924, died 1962. Cause of death listed as heart failure. There was no mention of Thomas Reed or Henry Carver in the records. But something else caught his eye. A small, faded note tucked into the margin of a 1958 baptismal record. It read, "Pray for TR, lost to the mill." His stomach turned. The initials matched. Was this a coincidence, or had someone known about Thomas Reed's death even then? He drove to the library that afternoon, the weight of the confession pressing harder with every mile. The town of Willow Creek was small, its history preserved in brittle newspapers and microfiche. He found an article from 1958, buried in the back pages of the Willow Creek Gazette. Local man missing. Search underway. Thomas Reed, 22, had vanished after a night at the mill where he worked as a laborer. The search had lasted a week, but no body was found. The article mentioned Henry Carver, who had been questioned but released, claiming he'd been home that night. The case went cold, forgotten by all but the whispers of the town's older residents. Father Callahan's hand shook as he read. How could a voice from the confessional know details the police never uncovered? And why Margaret Hensley? Her death in 1962, 4 years after the murder, left no connection to the crime. At least, none he could see. That night, he returned to the church, unable to stay away from the confessional. The booth felt smaller now, its wooden walls closing in like a trap. He sat, his breath shallow, waiting. The clock on the church wall ticked past midnight. Then it came again, a whisper, faint at first, then clearer. "Forgive me, Father," it said. And this time the voice was different. It was male, gravelly, laced with a sorrow that seemed to seep into the air. "My name is Thomas Reed. I was taken from this world too soon." Father Callahan's heart stopped. The voice described the same murder, but from a different angle. The victims. Thomas spoke of the pain, the betrayal, the cold earth swallowing him as Henry Carver walked away. But there was something else, a detail Margaret hadn't mentioned. A locket dropped in the struggle, buried with him in the ditch. Thomas's voice grew desperate, pleading for the locket to be found, for his story to be told. Father Callahan stumbled out of the confessional, his lantern flickering as he checked the other side. Empty again. He stood in the silent church, the weight of 2 confessions now pressing against his chest. He didn't know it yet, but this was only the second thread in a tapestry of secrets that would unravel the town's history. The dead were speaking, and they weren't finished. Each confession was pulling him deeper into a mystery that threatened to blur the line between faith and fear. What was this locket, and why did it matter? Was he being chosen to uncover a truth? Or was he being drawn into something far darker? Something that used the voices of the dead to speak its own will? The question of the locket haunted Father Daniel Callahan like a shadow that refused to fade, even as the first light of dawn crept through the rectory windows. It was now 2 days after the initial whisper, in that same bleak November of 1993, and Willow Creek seemed smaller, its streets winding tighter around secrets long buried. He couldn't ignore Thomas Reed's plea any longer. The voice had described the locket with such clarity. Silver, engraved with a delicate M, intertwined with a rose, lost in the dirt where his life had ended. Father Callahan told himself it was madness, that voices from beyond couldn't guide the living. But a deeper part of him, the part forged in years of listening to human frailty, urged him forward. What if this was a divine test, or worse, a demonic lure? He grabbed a shovel from the church shed, its handle worn from years of tending the graveyard, and drove to the old mill under the cover of a misty morning. The mill stood abandoned, its wheel frozen in time, overgrown with vines that clutched at the rotting wood like desperate fingers. The ditch behind the mill was overgrown, a tangle of weeds and forgotten debris, but Father Callahan's memory of the confessions led him straight to it. He began digging, the earth yielding reluctantly, cold and damp against his skin. Each shovelful brought a mix of doubt and anticipation. Doubt that he was chasing phantoms, anticipation that he might unearth something real. Hours passed, his cassock muddied, his breaths coming in labored gasps. Then the shovel hit something solid, not rock but metal. His heart raced as he knelt, brushing away the soil with trembling hands. There it was. A silver locket, tarnished but unmistakable, the engraving M and Rose just as Thomas had described. Inside, a faded photograph of a young woman, her smile frozen in happier times. Father Callahan sat back on his heels, the locket heavy in his palm. This wasn't delusion. This was proof. The confessions weren't tricks of the mind, they were echoes demanding justice. But the discovery stirred something deeper, a unease that coiled in his gut. Who was M? Margaret Hensley. The initials matched, but why would she have given a locket to Thomas Reed? He pocketed the item and hurried back to the church, the mill's creaking echoes following him like accusations. In the rectory, he pored over old parish records again, cross-referencing names. Margaret Hensley had been unmarried, a schoolteacher devoted to the church. But there was a notation from 1957, a brief mention of her involvement in a community event with Thomas Reed, a fundraiser for the mill workers. Could there have been a connection, a hidden romance cut short by violence? And Henry Carver, the named killer, had been a deacon in the church before his death. Father Callahan felt the pieces shifting, forming a picture of betrayal woven into the fabric of Willow Creek's past. The town he had served for 20 years suddenly felt like a stranger, its history laced with unspoken sins. That evening, as the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the pews, Father Callahan returned to the confessional. He didn't have to wait long. The whisper came softer this time, but unmistakable. Margaret's voice again. "You found it," she said, a note of relief threading through the hollow tone. "The locket was my promise to Thomas, a secret we kept from the world." She confessed more, how Henry Carver, jealous and enraged by their affair, had confronted Thomas at the mill, the argument escalating into a fatal blow. Margaret had seen it from afar, hidden in the shadows, too afraid to intervene. Her guilt had festered, leading to her early death. Officially heart failure, but truly a broken spirit. "I couldn't speak then," she whispered, "but now, through you, perhaps justice can come." Father Callahan leaned forward, his forehead against the lattice. "Why me?" he asked aloud, his voice cracking. The response was chilling. "Because you understand silence, Father. You've kept secrets too." The words lingered, stirring a memory Father Callahan had long suppressed, a fleeting doubt from his early days in the priesthood, a confession he had heard and buried deep. But this wasn't about him. It was about the dead seeking closure. He left the confessional with the locket burning in his pocket, determined to confront the past. The next day he visited the town historian, an elderly woman named Eliza Thorne, who lived in a cluttered house filled with yellowed clippings. She remembered the Reed case vaguely, but when shown the locket, her eyes widened. "That belonged to Margaret," she confirmed. She was heartbroken after Thomas disappeared. Folks whispered about Henry Carver, but no proof ever surfaced. Father Callahan nodded, the weight of the revelations pressing heavier. He realized this wasn't just about one murder. The confessions were unraveling a chain of events, each voice adding a layer to a mystery that spanned decades. As night fell, another whisper awaited him. This time it was Henry Carver himself, his voice gruff and unrepentant at first, then cracking with remorse. "I didn't mean to," he confessed, describing the rage that overtook him, the panic that led him to hide the body. But there was more, a hint of something larger, a reason behind the jealousy that tied back to the church itself, a scandal involving misappropriated funds that Thomas had discovered. Father Callahan's mind reeled. The church, his sanctuary, implicated in corruption. He sat in the dark booth, the confessions weaving a web around him, each one pulling him closer to a truth that threatened to shatter his faith. The locket, now a talisman, seemed to pulse with unspoken stories. What other voices would emerge? And how deep did this darkness go if even the dead couldn't rest until it was exposed? The days blurred into a haze of research and restless nights. Father Callahan began mapping the connections. Margaret, Thomas, Henry, all linked to St. Augustine's in subtle ways. Parish ledgers showed discrepancies in donations around 1958, sums that vanished without explanation. Could Thomas have been silenced for knowing too much? The priest's isolation grew, He avoided his parishioners, fearing their eyes held judgments he couldn't face. Yet the confessions continued, each one more insistent, as if the dead sensed his wavering resolve. A new voice joined. Eliza Thorne's long-deceased husband, who had been a mill worker, confessing his own complicity in covering up the financial misdeeds. The web expanded, implicating town elders who had passed on, their secrets now spilling forth through the confessional. Father Callahan felt the toll on his spirit, the constant barrage eroding his sanity like water on stone. He questioned everything, his vocation, his beliefs, the very nature of the soul. Were these voices divine messengers or manifestations of a fracturing mind? He confided in no one, bearing the burden alone, but the emotional strain mounted. Empathy for the dead warred with fear of what they revealed, a mirror to the human capacity for deception and regret. The locket became his anchor, a tangible link to the past, reminding him that some truths demanded to be heard, no matter the cost. As the whispers grew in number, he sensed an approaching climax, a revelation that would tie all the threads together, or unravel him completely. The church, once a place of solace, now felt like a vessel adrift in a storm of forgotten sins, and Father Callahan its unwilling captain. Human. Continue. The revelations from the confessional had begun to erode Father Daniel Callahan's sense of certainty, like acid slowly dissolving the foundations of a once sturdy structure. By mid-November 1993, Willow Creek's autumn leaves had turned to a brittle carpet underfoot, mirroring the fragility he felt within. The locket, now safely tucked in a drawer in the rectory, served as a constant reminder that the voices weren't mere hallucinations. They carried weight, substance, truths that had lain dormant for decades. Yet, with each new confession, the priest found himself questioning not just the past but his own role in the present. The church scandal hinted at by Henry Carver's whisper gnawed at him. Misappropriated funds, silenced witnesses, a web of deceit that seemed to center on St. Augustine's itself. Father Callahan spent his days in the archives, his eyes straining over faded ledgers, searching for anomalies that could confirm the dead's accusations. What he found chilled him deeper than the encroaching winter. A series of entries from 1957 to 1958 showing donations earmarked for orphanage renovations, sums that vanished without corresponding expenses. The signatures approving the transfers belonged to Father Elias Monroe, his predecessor, who had passed in 1985 under mysterious circumstances, listed as natural causes but whispered by some as despair-induced. That evening, as twilight painted the church in hues of fading gold, Father Callahan entered the confessional with a mix of dread and compulsion. The booth had become both sanctuary and prison, its dim light a veil over the intangible. He hadn't waited long when the whisper returned, this time a new voice, Father Elias Monroe himself. The tone was weary, burdened, as if speaking from a place of eternal unrest. "Forgive me, Daniel," it began, using his first name in a way that sent a shiver down his spine. "I carried this weight so you wouldn't have to." Elias confessed to the embezzlement, how the funds were diverted to cover personal debts, a gambling habit hidden behind the collar. Thomas Reed, working at the mill, had stumbled upon receipts in the church basement during a repair job. Confronting Elias privately, the priest had panicked, confiding in Henry Carver, who took it upon himself to silence the threat. "It was never meant to end in death," Elias whispered, his voice cracking with spectral regret. But once the deed was done, the silence spread like a plague. Margaret, aware of the affair and the confrontation, had been coerced into quietude, her guilt festering until it claimed her. Father Callahan gripped the edge of the bench, his knuckles white. This wasn't just a murder. It was a conspiracy rooted in the very institution he had devoted his life to. Elias's confession continued, revealing how the scandal touched more lives. Parishioners who suspected but were dismissed. Families quietly paid off to relocate. One name stood out, Sarah Linden, a young widow who had volunteered at the church, disappearing in 1960 after questioning the orphanage funds. Her voice joined the chorus the next night, soft and accusatory. "I saw the ledgers, Father. I knew." She described her fate, not violence, but exile, forced to leave town under threats. Her disappearance a cover for a life in hiding until her death in 1982. But Sarah added a layer. She had left behind a journal, hidden in the church attic, detailing the embezzlement and the cover-up. Father Callahan's pulse quickened. If real, this could be the key to validating everything, to bringing closure not just to the dead but to the living remnants of Willow Creek. Driven by this new lead, he climbed to the attic the following morning, the stairs creaking under his weight like reluctant confessions. The space was a forgotten realm of dust and cobwebs, boxes stacked haphazardly, relics of past sermons and festivals. He searched for hours, moving crates with aching muscles until his fingers brushed a small leather-bound book wedged behind a beam. The journal was Sarah's, its pages filled with neat script chronicling the discrepancies, the meetings with Elias, the fear that followed. Entries detailed Henry Carver's involvement, Margaret's silent complicity, and even hints of other clergy turning a blind eye. Father Callahan sat amid the dust, reading until the light failed, emotion swirling, betrayal at the church's fallibility, empathy for those ensnared, intrigue at the unfolding puzzle. This wasn't divine intervention. It felt like a reckoning, the dead using him as a conduit to expose what the living had buried. As nights progressed, the confessions intensified, voices overlapping in his mind even outside the booth. He heard from minor figures, a mill worker who had helped hide evidence, a parishioner who had received hush money. Each added nuance, painting a portrait of a town complicit in its own decay, where faith had been twisted into a shield for wrongdoing. Father Callahan's sleep grew fragmented, dreams haunted by faceless whispers, his reflection in the mirror showing hollowed eyes and a pallor that spoke of inner turmoil. He began to withdraw further, canceling services under the guise of illness. His interactions with the community reduced to curt nods, yet the emotional pull was undeniable. He felt a kinship with these souls, their regrets mirroring doubts he had long suppressed about his own path to the priesthood, a youthful indiscretion, a lost love that had driven him to the cloth. One particularly stormy night, the confessional brought a voice that shifted everything, his own mother's, who had died in 1989. "Daniel," she whispered, "I've watched you struggle. This isn't just their story, it's yours." She revealed a family tie to the scandal. Her brother, Uncle Josiah, had been a silent partner in the embezzlement, using the funds for a failed business venture. The guilt had poisoned their family, contributing to her lingering illness. Father Callahan wept silently, the booth echoing his sobs. This personal connection shattered his detachment. He was no longer an observer but a participant, his bloodline entangled in the web. The revelations forced him to confront his own vulnerabilities, the unpredictability of heritage, the way past sins echoed through generations. With the journal in hand and voices guiding him, Father Callahan started piecing together a timeline, mapping names and events on a hidden wall in the rectory. The corruption extended beyond 1958, influencing decisions in the church for years, subtle manipulations that favored certain families. He sensed the dead's urgency, as if time was running out, their whispers growing fainter yet more insistent. Empathy swelled within him for these tormented spirits, trapped by unfinished business, their pleas a mirror to human frailty. But fear crept in too. What if this exposure destroyed the church he loved? What if the town turned against him, seeing madness where he saw truth? The psychological strain mounted, moments of doubt where he wondered if grief and isolation had conjured it all. Yet the tangible evidence, the locket, the journal, anchored him, pushing him toward a confrontation with the living descendants of those involved. As December approached, a new voice emerged, that of a child, little Emily Carver, Henry's granddaughter, who had died young in 1975 from an unexplained ailment. Her innocent tone contrasted the darkness, confessing family secrets passed down, tales of the mill murder whispered at bedtime, a curse believed to haunt the bloodline. Emily's whisper hinted at a larger enigma, a ritual perhaps tied to the church's founding where confessions weren't just heard but bound, ensuring silence even in death. Father Callahan's intrigue deepened. Was this supernatural, or a manifestation of collective guilt? He delved into church history, uncovering old texts about binding rites, folklore blended with faith, suggesting the confessional held more than spiritual power. The emotional layers accumulated, each confession peeling back another veil on the human mind's capacity for denial and redemption. The priest's journey became a solitary odyssey, his faith tested against the inexplicable. He felt accompanied by the dead, their presence a strange comfort amid the isolation. Yet the toll was evident. Appetite lost, nights sleepless, a growing sense of detachment from the living world. The story's threads tightened, leading toward an inevitable revelation that could either liberate or condemn. What lay at the heart of this binding, and how would Father Callahan, now inextricably linked, navigate the storm without losing himself? The whispers promised answers, but at what cost to his sanity? The hint of a binding rite mentioned by little Emily Carver's whisper had ignited a spark of obsession in Father Daniel Callahan, transforming his already tumultuous investigation into a descent through layers of arcane lore, intertwined with the church's history. As November 1993 gave way to the biting chill of early December, Willow Creek wrapped itself in a blanket of frost, the bare trees standing like sentinels guarding ancient secrets. The rectory felt colder now, not just from the weather but from the pervasive sense of otherworldliness that clung to its walls. Father Callahan had taken to spending his afternoons in the church's seldom-visited library, a small room tucked behind the altar, filled with volumes that predated the town's founding in the mid-1800s. Dust motes danced in the slanted light from a narrow window as he pored over yellowed tomes, his fingers tracing faded ink that spoke of rituals long dismissed as folklore. The binding rite, as described in an 1892 parish chronicle, was no mere superstition. It was a ceremonial practice rooted in early immigrant traditions, blending Catholic confession with old-world mysticism. It purported to bind sins to the confessional, ensuring that unabsolved transgressions would echo eternally, trapping souls in a limbo until redemption was granted by a worthy intermediary. Emily's voice had returned sporadically, her childish timbre carrying an eerie wisdom. The rite was meant to protect, she whispered one evening as Father Callahan sat in the confessional, the candle flame flickering like a hesitant heartbeat. But Grandpa Henry twisted it. He bound us all. She revealed how, after the murder, Henry had performed a makeshift version of the rite in the church basement, using stolen holy water and incantations from a forbidden book, intending to silence Thomas's spirit forever. Instead, it created a chain reaction, linking the souls of all involved, Margaret, Elias, Sarah, and others, to the confessional, their confessions doomed to repeat until the binding was broken. Emily's own death from a mysterious fever was tied to this curse, a familial echo of guilt, manifesting as illness. Father Callahan listened, his mind reeling from the blend of faith and the occult. Was this the church's dark underbelly, a fusion of spirituality and superstition that had festered over generations? He felt a profound empathy for Emily, a child caught in the web of adult failings, her innocence a stark contrast to the tangled deceptions. Compelled by this new insight, he ventured into the church basement the next day, a damp, shadowy space cluttered with forgotten relics, old pews, cracked statues, and crates of outdated hymnals. Armed with a flashlight, its beam cutting through the gloom like a blade, he searched for signs of the rite. Amid the cobwebs, he found a hidden alcove behind a loose stone wall, revealed only because Emily's whisper had guided him. Look where the light doesn't reach. Inside lay a small wooden box, its lid carved with intricate symbols, a cross entwined with thorns symbolizing bound sins. Opening it carefully, Father Callahan discovered a collection of items: dried herbs, a vial of what appeared to be consecrated oil, and a tattered notebook filled with Henry Carver's scrawled entries. The pages detailed the rite's steps, drawn from an obscure text smuggled from Europe by early settlers, intended originally for exorcising lingering spirits but adapted here for concealment. Henry's notes confessed his desperation. After killing Thomas, he feared retribution from beyond, so he invoked the binding to seal the secret, unwittingly ensnaring more souls as the scandal spread. The discovery deepened Father Callahan's intrigue, but it also amplified his inner conflict. Nights blurred into days as he cross-referenced the notebook with church records, uncovering references to similar rites in the parish's early history, cases where confessors reported hearing echoes of past sins during times of crisis. One entry from 1923 described a priest who claimed to hear voices during the Great Depression, attributing it to economic despair awakening bound spirits. Father Callahan wondered if his own experiences were a modern iteration, triggered by some unseen catalyst. His mother's voice returned, softer now, revealing her knowledge of Uncle Josiah's involvement in a similar binding attempt to cover his tracks. "We thought it would end with us," she whispered. "But bindings don't break easily." This familial revelation stirred a whirlwind of emotions: regret for unspoken conversations in life, a poignant connection to his heritage, and a growing fear that he was predestined for this role. As the whispers multiplied, Father Callahan began experiencing them outside the confessional. Faint murmurs in the wind during walks through the graveyard, echoes in the creak of floorboards at night. A new voice emerged, that of Father Elias's predecessor, Monsignor Harlan Gray, deceased in 1942, who confessed to introducing the rite to the parish as a means to safeguard controversial confessions during wartime. Harlan's tone was authoritative yet remorseful, explaining how the rite evolved from a protective measure to a tool for suppression, binding not just sins but truths that could destabilize the community. He hinted at a key to unraveling it, a counter-ritual requiring the intermediary to confront the original sin in the presence of all bound souls. Father Callahan's empathy extended to these historical figures, seeing them as flawed humans grappling with the weight of authority, their actions rippling through time to ensnare the innocent. The psychiatric undercurrents of his ordeal began to surface more prominently. Sleepless nights led to moments of disorientation, shadows in the mirror that seemed to shift independently, a sense of detachment from his own thoughts. He confided in a journal of his own, documenting the confessions not just for evidence but to anchor his sanity. Entries revealed his growing doubt. Were these voices external or projections of a mind cracking under isolation and grief? The loss of his mother, compounded by the revelations of family involvement, had perhaps unearthed suppressed traumas, manifesting as auditory hallucinations tied to his deep-seated faith. Yet the tangible artifacts, the locket, Sarah's journal, Henry's box, challenged this self-diagnosis, creating a tension between rational explanation and the inexplicable. Driven by Harlan's guidance, Father Callahan attempted a preliminary step toward the counter-ritual, gathering symbols from the box in the confessional one stormy night. As thunder rumbled overhead, he recited prayers interwoven with the rite's inversions, his voice trembling. The air thickened, and for the first time, multiple voices converged not sequentially, but in a chorus: Margaret, Thomas, Henry, Emily, his mother, and others, their whispers overlapping in a symphony of pleas and accusations. The experience was overwhelming, a psychological barrage that left him drained, slumped against the booth's wall. Emotions surged: fear of losing control, suspense at the nearing resolution, a profound sorrow for the trapped souls. He emerged from the church into the rain, the water washing away surface grime but not the inner turmoil. Days later, another layer unfolded with the voice of a town outsider, Dr. Elias Thorne, no relation to the historian, a psychiatrist who had practiced in Willow Creek briefly in the 1960s, before his untimely death in a house fire. Dr. Thorne's whisper brought a clinical perspective. "I treated some who heard the echoes," he confessed. "I dismissed them as delusions, but now I see the pattern." He described patients exhibiting symptoms akin to dissociative states, triggered by proximity to the church, suggesting the binding rite had a collective psychological impact, perhaps amplified by suggestion and shared folklore. Father Callahan pondered this, wondering if the town's history had created a mass hysteria, with him as its latest victim. Empathy for these past sufferers grew, mirroring his own vulnerability. The investigation pressed on, Father Callahan visiting abandoned sites mentioned in the confessions, the old orphanage, now a crumbling ruin, where he found etched symbols matching the rite. Each discovery heightened the mystery, the emotional stakes rising as he felt the dead's desperation mirroring his own quest for understanding. The human mind's fragility became ever more apparent, a theme woven through every whisper, how faith, guilt, and superstition could intertwine to create unbreakable chains. As winter deepened, he sensed the binding tightening around him, pulling him toward a confrontation that could either free the souls or claim his own. The voices grew more personal, probing his doubts, forcing him to face unresolved aspects of his psyche. What would the counter-ritual demand? And could he summon the strength to perform it without fracturing completely? The shadows lengthened, promising revelations that would test the limits of belief and endurance. The shadows of the binding rite had woven themselves into the very fabric of Father Daniel Callahan's existence, blurring the boundaries between the tangible and the ethereal in ways that tested the resilience of his spirit. As December 1993 deepened, Willow Creek succumbed to a relentless snowfall, blanketing the town in a pristine white that belied the undercurrents of unrest stirring beneath. The rectory, once a haven of quiet reflection, now felt like a pressure chamber, where every creak and whisper amplified the priest's growing isolation. The counter-ritual hinted at by Monsignor Harlan Gray loomed as both salvation and peril, a sequence of invocations requiring the gathering of all bound souls in a single confessional session, where the intermediary must absolve them collectively, risking his own essence in the process. Father Callahan had pieced together the steps from Henry's notebook and historical texts, a circle of salt for protection, relics from each soul's life arranged in a mandala, and a recitation blending Latin prayers with ancient reversals. But the emotional cost was mounting. Each preparation stirred a maelstrom of doubt, empathy for the entrapped, and a creeping fear that he might not emerge unchanged. Nights in the confessional grew longer, the booth a portal where the veil thinned perilously. The voices, once sequential, now converged more frequently, their chorus a disorienting blend of pleas and revelations. One such night, under a moon obscured by clouds, Father Callahan arranged the items: the locket, Sarah's journal page, a fragment of Henry's notebook, Emily's faded photograph from family records, in the prescribed pattern on the booth's floor. As he began the incantation, the air grew heavy, charged with an unseen energy that made his skin prickle. The gathering commenced. Margaret's voice first, soft and resolute, recounting her unspoken love and the silence that doomed her. Thomas joined, his tone laced with lingering betrayal, describing the moment of impact without graphic detail, focusing instead on the emotional void left behind. Henry followed, his gravelly whisper breaking with remorse, admitting the jealousy that spiraled into irreversible action. Emily's childish lilt wove through, innocent yet wise, speaking of family burdens passed like heirlooms. His mother's voice anchored the ensemble, her maternal warmth evoking tears as she revealed how Uncle Josiah's complicity had shadowed their home, contributing to fractures in family bonds. As the spectral witnesses multiplied, Dr. Thorne's clinical detachment provided a counterpoint, analyzing the psychological ramifications. "This binding mimics repression," he whispered, "where guilt festers in the subconscious, manifesting as hallucinations or collective delusions." His insights prompted Father Callahan to reflect on his own mental state. Were these voices external entities or projections of a mind unraveling under stress? The priest's journal entries from this period revealed a deepening introspection, noting episodes of derealization where the church walls seemed to shift, or moments when he questioned the authenticity of his memories. Empathy surged for the bound souls, each one a mirror to aspects of human vulnerability. Margaret's hidden passion representing suppressed desires, Thomas's fate illustrating the cost of truth-seeking, Henry's regret embodying the pitfalls of unchecked emotion. Even as he absolved them verbally, following the right script, Father Callahan felt pieces of his own unresolved past surfacing, a youthful romance abandoned for the priesthood, doubts about divine calling that had simmered unspoken. The gathering wasn't without interruption. New voices emerged, drawn by the ritual's pull. A former parishioner, Agnes Whitaker, deceased in 1978, confessed her role as a silent observer to the embezzlement, her fear of scandal keeping her mute. Her whisper added texture. The town knew whispers, but chose blindness. Agnes revealed a hidden ledger buried under the orphanage ruins, detailing the full extent of the financial web, implicating not just clergy but local officials who had benefited. Compelled by this, Father Callahan braved the snow the next day, trudging to the dilapidated orphanage on the town's outskirts. The building stood as a skeletal remnant, its windows shattered eyes staring blankly. With a crowbar from the church shed, he pried open a floorboard in what had been the administrator's office, unearthing a rusted metal box containing the ledger. Its pages, preserved remarkably, listed transactions that extended into the 1960s, showing how the corruption had funded illicit ventures, creating a legacy of dependency and silence among families. This discovery intensified the emotional labyrinth. Back in the rectory, poring over the ledger by lamplight, Father Callahan felt a profound sorrow for Willow Creek. a community built on foundations of deceit, where faith had been commodified. The voices praised his progress in whispers that echoed even in daylight, but the toll on his psyche was evident. He experienced vivid dreams where he walked among the dead, their forms indistinct yet familiar, engaging in conversations that blurred into waking thoughts. Paranoia crept in. He avoided mirrors, fearing the reflection might show a stranger's eyes. Yet, intrigue propelled him forward. The binding's mechanics fascinated, a psychiatric puzzle where collective guilt created a shared hallucinatory field, amplified by the rite's mysticism. "Doctor?" Thorne's voice returned, suggesting hypnotherapy techniques to differentiate delusion from reality, but Father Callahan dismissed it, clinging to the tangible proofs that validated his experiences. As the ritual neared completion, the convergence peaked one frigid evening. Father Callahan, encircled by salt in the confessional, invoked the final absolution. The voices swelled, a cacophony of release and warning. The veil phrase, they chorused, but breaking it demands a price. In that moment, he felt a surge as if essences brushed against his soul, imparting fragments of their lives. Margaret's quiet joy in stolen moments. Thomas's ambition cut short Emily's playful innocence. The emotional transference was overwhelming, a flood of empathy that left him gasping, his heart racing with borrowed regrets. Emerging from the booth, the church felt altered, quieter, as if a weight had lifted. But the fracturings lingered. He noticed subtle changes, a chill in rooms that shouldn't be cold, whispers fading but not gone. His mother's voice lingered longest, a gentle farewell. "You've freed us, but guard your own bindings." The days following brought a fragile calm, yet Father Callahan sensed an impending shift. He documented everything meticulously, considering confiding in a trusted colleague from a neighboring parish, but hesitation held him back, fear of disbelief, of being labeled unstable. The psychiatric implications deepened his self-analysis. He read old medical texts in the library, learning about auditory hallucinations linked to grief and isolation, conditions exacerbated by his solitary life. Empathy for historical figures who might have endured similar trials grew, seeing the binding as a metaphor for mental entrapment. Intrigue about the rite's origins led to further research, uncovering similar phenomena in other towns with immigrant roots, suggesting a cultural undercurrent of spiritual psychology. Yet the calm was illusory. Whispers returned sporadically, now including his own voice. Echoes of doubt spoken aloud in private moments, replayed as if recorded. The self-confrontation stirred horror. Was the binding transferring to him, making him the new vessel? The emotional impact was profound, a spiral of suspense where every silence pregnant with potential revelation. Father Callahan's resolve hardened, but cracks appeared. Forgotten appointments, disheveled appearance, a detachment from daily rituals. The town noticed his withdrawal, whispers among parishioners mirroring the spectral ones speculating on his well-being. He felt accompanied yet utterly alone, the journey toward the inexplicable drawing him closer to a threshold where mind and mystery converged. As winter's grip tightened, a new voice hinted at the rite's incomplete nature, that of the church's founder, Reverend Silas Ward from 1847, his tone archaic and commanding. Silas revealed the rite's true genesis, a safeguard against frontier madness where isolation bred visions. "You've stirred the core," he warned, "and it hungers for resolution." This propelled Father Callahan toward the final elements, gathering artifacts from the founder's era hidden in the steeple. The ascent amid howling winds symbolized his climb through layers of history and psyche. Each step amplified the intrigue, the emotional stakes rising as he confronted the possibility that the binding was no external force, but a manifestation of generational trauma. A psychiatric inheritance passed through the confessional's legacy. The veil fractured further, promising a climax that would redefine his understanding of the human mind's depths. The ascent to the steeple marked a pivotal threshold for Father Daniel Callahan, each rung of the narrow ladder echoing like a heartbeat in the confined space, amplifying the sense of crossing into forbidden territory. By late December 1993, Willow Creek lay under a heavy shroud of snow, the church's tower piercing the overcast sky like a finger pointing toward unresolved heavens. Reverend Silas Ward's voice had guided him here, the founder's archaic whisper describing relics concealed in the bell chamber. artifacts essential to completing the counter ritual. Father Callahan's breath came in visible puffs as he climbed, the cold seeping through his woolen coat, a physical manifestation of the chill that had settled in his soul. The steeple, rarely accessed except for maintenance, was a realm of dust and forgotten time, its wooden beams groaning under the weight of history. At the top, he paused, the town sprawling below like a miniature model, its secrets miniaturized yet no less potent. The bell hung silent, its clapper wrapped in cloth to muffle winter storms, but to Father Callahan it seemed to hum with latent energy. Pushing aside cobwebs that clung like spectral veils, he searched the chamber's nooks, his flashlight beam dancing over rusted nails and faded inscriptions carved into the wood. Silas's instructions echoed in his mind. Beneath the bell's shadow, where the first light strikes, there, behind a loose panel etched with a faint cross, he found a small compartment containing a leather pouch, brittle with age. Inside lay a collection of items. A silver chalice miniature engraved with runes blending Latin and older scripts, a sheaf of parchment with the original binding rites incantations, and a crystal vial empty but once holding holy essence, its stopper sealed with wax. Father Callahan handled them reverently, feeling a subtle vibration, as if the objects retained echoes of past invocations. These were the tools of the church's genesis, brought by Silas from his European homeland, where folklore and faith intertwined to ward off the madness of isolation in new frontiers. The parchment detailed the rite's intent, to bind wandering spirits to sacred ground, preventing them from tormenting the living, but warning of misuse leading to eternal entrapment. Descending with the relics, Father Callahan felt the weight of generations pressing upon him, a continuum of human frailty where good intentions birthed unintended chains. Back in the rectory, he arranged the items alongside the others, the locket, journal, notebook, forming a more complete mandala on his desk. The voices responded almost immediately, even without the confessional's confines. Faint murmurs filled the room, approving yet urgent. Silas's voice dominated now, his tone a blend of paternal guidance and stern admonition. "These hold the key," he whispered during a late-night vigil, "but the counter demands your full surrender." He elaborated on the founder's era, Willow Creek founded amid pioneer hardships, where settlers faced not just physical trials but psychological ones. Hallucinations from fever, grief-induced visions, isolation breeding paranoia. The binding rite was Silas's innovation, drawing from old-world mysticism to anchor the community, but its power grew unchecked, absorbing sins like a sponge until it overflowed in scandals like the 1958 murder. This historical context stirred profound empathy in Father Callahan for Silas, a man who sought to protect but inadvertently created a psychic prison. Nights blurred as he studied the parchment, translating passages with a Latin dictionary, uncovering nuances. The rite required a vessel, a living intermediary whose mind could host the convergence without shattering. Father Callahan realized he fit this role, his solitary life and deep faith making him susceptible yet resilient. Doubts assailed him. Psychiatric texts he consulted described similar phenomena as folie à plusieurs, shared delusions propagated through cultural narratives, amplified in close-knit communities. Was the entire town subtly affected, their collective subconscious feeding the echoes? Dr. Thorne's voice reaffirmed this, whispering case studies from his practice. Patients hearing ancestral voices during stress, symptoms aligning with dissociative identity or auditory schizophrenia triggers. Father Callahan's self-reflection deepened, journaling episodes where his thoughts intertwined with the whispers, blurring self from other. The relic's presence intensified the manifestations. One evening, as snow fell silently outside, Father Callahan experienced a vivid reverie, not quite a dream, but an immersion where he walked the town's founding streets, conversing with Silas amid log cabins and flickering lanterns. The founder shared regrets, binding a settler's spirit who died unjustly, setting the precedent for later misuses. Awakening, Father Callahan felt residual emotions, Silas's determination mixed with sorrow, lingering like a borrowed mood. This transference heightened the intrigue, suggesting the rite facilitated empathic links, a psychiatric bridge between minds across time. He empathized with the bound souls more acutely, seeing their entrapment as a metaphor for mental stagnation, where unresolved traumas replay eternally. Compelled to test the relic's power, He incorporated them into a preparatory session in the confessional. Placing the chalice at the mandala's center, he recited partial inversions. The response was immediate. A surge of voices clearer than before, each sharing untold facets. Agnes Whitaker returned, revealing her connection to Silas's descendants, a lineage that perpetuated the rite's secrecy. A new voice joined, Lydia Ward, Silas's wife, deceased in 1852, her whisper frail yet resolute. Lydia confessed the rite's personal toll. Used to bind her own grief after losing a child, it numbed her emotions, leading to a life of quiet despair. Her story evoked tears from Father Callahan, mirroring his mother's lingering illness, a poignant reminder of how suppression breeds inner voids. The emotional layers accumulated, each revelation peeling back the human mind's complexity, the way faith could both heal and harm, creating psychic scars passed generationally. Father Callahan's isolation peaked. He ceased all public duties, the church standing empty during services, parishioners' knocks going unanswered. Whispers from living townsfolk reached him indirectly, speculating on his reclusion, but he remained immersed in the spectral world. Intrigue about the counter-ritual's climax grew. Silas hinted it required a full moon alignment, coinciding with Christmas Eve, adding symbolic weight. A night of birth amid spiritual reckoning. As the date approached, Father Callahan prepared, meticulously, fasting to purify his vessel, meditating on absolutions. Dreams intensified, blending memories with visions, walking with Thomas Reed along the mill path, feeling Margaret's unspoken love, bearing Henry's remorse. These immersions fostered deep empathy, but also fatigue. Hollow cheeks, trembling hands, a gaze distant as if peering through veils. Psychiatric self-diagnosis loomed. Perhaps prolonged stress induced a fugue state, where the mind constructed narratives to process grief. Yet the relic's tangibility countered this, their age-verified inscriptions anchoring the inexplicable. A pivotal whisper came from Uncle Josiah, his voice gruff and apologetic, confessing his adaptation of the rite in the 1950s to cover embezzlement traces. It bound us tighter, he admitted, linking family history directly to the church's legacy. This personal tie shattered remaining detachment. Father Callahan felt ensnared, his bloodline a thread in the web. Sorrow for lost opportunities, with his mother, uncle, mingled with suspense, the approaching ritual promising release or rupture. The steeple's echoes extended beyond artifacts. Climbing again, Father Callahan found inscriptions on beams, names of early bound souls carved as memorials. Touching them evoked flashes, fleeting emotions, snippets of lives. This sensory connection deepened the mystery, suggesting the church itself as a repository of collective psyche, an architectural manifestation of Jungian shadows. Empathy for Willow Creek swelled, a town haunted not by ghosts but by unaddressed histories, psychiatric undercurrents flowing like underground rivers. As Christmas Eve neared, the voices harmonized, a prelude to convergence. Father Callahan sensed the veil thinning perilously, his mind a bridge straining under the load. The human element remained central: fragility of belief, unpredictability of emotion, vulnerability to the past's grip. What would the ritual unveil? A liberation of souls, or a revelation of his own bindings? The steeple's hidden echoes promised answers, but at the edge of endurance, where mind and mystery teetered on collapse. The relics from the steeple had transformed Father Daniel Callahan's preparations into a tapestry of anticipation and dread, each artifact pulsing with the accumulated essence of Willow Creek's shadowed past. As Christmas Eve 1993 descended upon the town, a hush fell over the snow-laden streets, the festive lights twinkling in distant windows like stars indifferent to earthly turmoil. The church stood as a solitary beacon, its interior dimly lit by candles that Father Callahan had arranged in a protective perimeter around the confessional. The mandala now complete with Silas's chalice at its heart, the parchment unfurled beside it and the vial refilled with holy water from the font, symbolizing renewal amid binding. He had fasted for 3 days, His body weakened, but his mind sharpened to a razor's edge, attuned to the subtle shifts in the air that heralded the voice's approach. The full moon, veiled by thin clouds, cast a silvery glow through the stained glass windows, illuminating scenes of biblical reckonings that seemed eerily prescient. Father Callahan entered the confessional at midnight, the hour Silas had specified for the counter-ritual's peak potency, when the veil between realms thinned to gossamer. He sprinkled salt in a circle, his hands steady despite the inner quiver, and began the incantations, Latin absolutions interwoven with reversals from the parchment, his voice a low chant that resonated through the booth. The response was gradual at first, a stirring like wind through leaves, then building to a presence that filled the space. The voices converged, not as chaos, but in orchestrated layers, each soul stepping forward in spectral sequence. Silas led, his archaic timbre grounding the ensemble. We gather to unbind what was wrought in error. He recounted the rite's inception amid pioneer desperation, empathy evident in his confession of hubris, believing he could control the intangible forces of grief and madness that plagued early settlers. Lydia followed, her frail whisper evoking the personal cost, describing how the binding dulled her maternal sorrow to a numb ache, leaving her a shell in life, trapped in echo after death. The chorus expanded, drawing in the familiar. Margaret's voice laced with quiet resolve, absolving her silence in the face of love and fear. Thomas's, carrying the weight of untimely end, forgiving the betrayal while seeking acknowledgement. Henry's gruff tone breaking with genuine remorse, releasing the jealousy that had festered into action. Emily's childish purity cut through, her words a poignant plea for innocence reclaimed, untainted by familial shadows. Father Callahan's mother interwove, her maternal warmth enveloping him, confessing family ties to the corruption and urging him to break the cycle. Uncle Josiah joined, his gruff admissions revealing the generational pull, how economic desperation twisted faith into deception. Agnes, Dr. Thorne, Monsignor Gray, each added their thread, weaving a narrative of human vulnerability, the mind's propensity to suppress, the soul's cry for resolution, the community's silent complicity in perpetuating cycles of denial. As the ritual progressed, Father Callahan felt the emotional transference intensify, a floodgate opening to inundate his psyche with borrowed sentiments. Empathy swelled for Silas and Lydia, pioneers whose innovations born of necessity ensnared, futures unforeseen. For Margaret and Thomas, lovers caught in webs of societal constraint. For Henry and Elias, men undone by momentary lapses amplified by secrecy. Even the minor voices, mill workers, parishioners, evoked sorrow, their lives peripheral yet pivotal in the scandal's sprawl. The priest's own doubts surfaced, prompted by the chorus, whispers probing his vocational choice, the abandoned romance of youth, the grief for his mother that had lingered unaddressed. This self-confrontation stirred a profound introspection, the ritual becoming a mirror to his inner bindings, psychological chains of regret and isolation that paralleled the spectral ones. The chalice at the mandala's center began to hum faintly, a vibration that Father Callahan felt in his bones, as if the artifacts channeled the convergence's energy. Dr. Thorne's clinical perspective interjected amid the emotional tide. "See this as catharsis," he whispered, "a collective therapy where repressed traumas surface for integration." His insights framed the experience psychiatrically. The binding, as a metaphor for dissociative barriers, the counter-ritual a form of exposure therapy, forcing confrontation with the shadowed self. Father Callahan pondered this, his mind navigating the interplay of faith and science. Were these voices divine echoes or manifestations of a fractured psyche, amplified by folklore and solitude? The tangible relics grounded him, but moments of disorientation crept in. The booth's wall seeming to expand, shadows coalescing into indistinct forms, his heartbeat syncing with the chant's rhythm. Midway through, a surge occurred, the voices unified in a harmonious plea, their combined essence pressing against him like a warm current. Father Callahan extended absolutions, his words tailored to each soul's confession, feeling fragments lift away, lightening the air, easing the psychic load. Yet the process extracted a toll. He experienced flashes of their existences. Silas's frontier hardships, the sting of loss in Lydia's arms, Margaret's hidden joys, Thomas's final resignation. These immersions fostered a deep connection, a shared, humanity transcending time but also exhaustion, his vision blurring, limbs heavy as if bearing collective weights. Suspense built as Silas warned, the core resists, it clings to the vessel. This hinted at the ritual's risk, the binding seeking a new anchor, potentially claiming Father Callahan if his resolve faltered. Pausing to steady himself, he sipped. From the vial, the holy water a cool anchor amid the fervor. The convergence resumed, incorporating voices from deeper history. Settlers who had succumbed to the wilderness's mental strains, their whispers tales of visions and despairs that Silas had bound to preserve sanity. One, a woman named Eliza, the historian's ancestor, confessed hallucinations of ancestral spirits dismissed as madness but now revealed as early echoes of the rite. Her story mirrored Father Callahan's, evoking empathy for those labeled unstable, their experiences psychiatric harbingers of the binding's side effects. Intrigue deepened about the mind's malleability, how cultural narratives shaped perceptions, turning grief into ghosts, isolation into illusions. As dawn approached, the ritual neared its zenith. The moon's light intensified through the windows, casting ethereal patterns on the floor. Father Callahan chanted the final reversals, his voice hoarse but unwavering. The voices responded with gratitude fading one by one, Emily's giggle dissolving into peace, Henry's grunt softening to acceptance, Margaret and Thomas uniting in harmonious release. His mother's farewell lingered, a tender, "Be free, my son," stirring tears. Silas concluded, his presence majestic yet diminishing. The chains break, but echoes may linger in memory. The chalice's hum ceased, the air stilling to a profound quietude. The confessional feeling emptied of its otherworldly occupants. Emerging into the nave, Father Callahan collapsed onto a pew, the first rays of Christmas morning filtering in. Emotions cascaded. Relief at the apparent success, sorrow for the departed souls, a lingering intrigue about residual effects. The church felt renewed, yet he sensed subtle shifts, a warmth in the air, shadows less oppressive. Psychiatric reflections dominated his thoughts, the experience akin to a breakthrough in therapy, where confronting the subconscious yields integration but leaves vulnerability. He journaled feverishly, documenting the convergence's nuances, pondering if the voices were exercised or internalized, now part of his psyche's fabric. Days blended in recovery, the town awakening to holiday cheer oblivious to the spiritual upheaval. Father Callahan resumed minimal duties, his demeanor altered, eyes holding a depth that spoke of unseen journeys. Whispers returned faintly, not as burdens but echoes of wisdom, suggesting the binding's dissolution left imprints rather than chains. Empathy for Willow Creek's history grew, seeing the community as a mosaic of resilient minds scarred yet enduring. The ritual's aftermath prompted self-care, walks in the snow, contemplation of seeking counsel, though secrecy held him back. A new layer emerged in quiet moments, visions of unbound souls at peace, their gratitude manifesting as serene dreams. This fostered hope, the human mind's capacity for healing evident. Yet suspense lingered. What if remnants persisted, drawing him toward further enigmas? The eve's reckoning had shifted his worldview, the fragility of sanity a constant companion. As winter persisted, Father Callahan navigated this new reality, the story's threads converging toward an unforeseen horizon where he might join the echoes he had freed. The ritual's aftermath lingered like a faint mist over Willow Creek, the Christmas morning of 1993 dawning crisp and clear. Yet Father Daniel Callahan emerged from it altered, as if pieces of the unbound souls had woven themselves into the fabric of his being. The church bells rang out in celebration, their peals echoing through the empty nave, but to him, they carried undertones of the voices now silenced, or so he hoped. He spent the day in quiet reflection, attending a sparse holiday service where parishioners exchanged concerned glances at his gaunt frame and distant gaze. The convergence had granted a semblance of peace, The confessional stood mundane once more, its lattice screen no longer a portal to the ethereal, yet subtle remnants persisted, whispers not in words, but in sensations, a chill brushing his neck during prayers, a fleeting empathy for strangers that felt borrowed from Margaret's quiet compassion or Thomas's resilient spirit. Father Callahan dismissed them as after-effects, residues of the psychic strain, much like echoes in a vast hall fading gradually. As weeks unfolded into the new year of 1994, the town stirred from winter's slumber, unaware of the spiritual upheaval that had transpired within St. Augustine's walls. Father Callahan resumed his duties with measured caution, his sermons infused with newfound depth on themes of forgiveness and the mind's hidden burdens. Parishioners noted the change, a subtle intensity in his eyes as if he had glimpsed truths beyond the veil. He confided partially in Eliza Thorne, the historian, sharing fragments of the discoveries without revealing the supernatural elements, framing it as archival research into past scandals. She listened intently, her own family ties to the town's history evoking a shared intrigue. Together they pored over the ledger from the orphanage, cross-referencing with public records, uncovering how the embezzlement had subtly shaped Willow Creek's development, funds diverted to influential families, fostering inequalities that lingered in social divides. This rational pursuit anchored him, a counterbalance to the lingering echoes, but emotions swirled beneath. Empathy for the community's unwitting inheritance of past sins, a quiet sorrow for the bound souls now presumably at rest. Nights, however, brought the descent's early signs. Sleep eluded him, replaced by vivid reveries where the confessional's confines expanded into endless corridors, lined with faceless figures murmuring unresolved regrets. One recurring vision featured Silas Ward, not as a voice but a presence, guiding him through foggy landscapes representing the human psyche's labyrinth, paths of repression branching into dead ends of denial, illuminated by fleeting lights of insight. Father Callahan awoke sweat-dampened, his journal filling with entries analyzing these as psychiatric manifestations, perhaps post-traumatic responses to the ritual's intensity, where the mind processed the convergence through symbolic dreams.
He delved into borrowed books on psychology from the library,
reading about collective unconscious and archetypal symbols, seeing parallels in Silas's frontier innovations, a cultural psyche binding traumas to prevent chaos, only to amplify them over time. Intrigue mingled with unease. Was his role as vessel leaving permanent imprints, transforming him into a living repository of Willow Creek's collective memory? The echoes evolved, manifesting in waking hours. During confessions from living parishioners, he sensed overlays, faint intuitions of deeper truths unspoken, as if the rite had heightened his empathy to an uncanny degree. A young woman's admission of familial strife evoked Emily's innocent pleas, stirring a paternal sorrow not entirely his own. An elderly man's regrets mirrored Henry's remorse, prompting Father Callahan to offer absolutions laced with personal resonance. These moments disturbed him, blurring boundaries between self and other, fostering a growing detachment from his identity. He questioned the ritual's completeness. Had all bindings dissolved, or did fragments cling, drawing him into a subtle entrapment? Dr. Thorne's spectral insights, though faded, echoed in his thoughts, warnings of integration's double edge, where absorbing traumas could lead to dissociative shifts, the mind fracturing under assimilated weights. Compelled by this, Father Callahan revisited sites tied to the story. The mill ditch, now snow-covered but holding the Locketts' memory. The orphanage ruins where wind whistled through cracks like distant whispers. At the church basement, he examined Henry's box again, finding an overlooked inscription on the vial. The vessel bears the echo until it becomes one. This chilled him, hinting at a prophetic cycle where intermediaries merged with the bound, their essences intertwining eternally. Emotions surged, fear of losing autonomy, suspense at unraveling implications, a poignant empathy for predecessors like Elias and Harlan, who might have succumbed similarly, their natural death's masks for psychic exhaustion. He confided more in his journal, documenting perceptual shifts, colors seeming muted, sounds carrying hidden layers, a sense of time dilating during solitude. As spring hinted at arrival, the descent accelerated. Voices returned sporadically, not as confessions but fragments, snippets of conversations from the convergence, replaying in quiet moments. Silas's admonitions about the right's hunger, Lydia's quiet despair, his mother's gentle farewells. Father Callahan interpreted them psychiatrically. Auditory hallucinations triggered by stress, remnants of a mind conditioned to the confessional's portal. Yet their persistence eroded his confidence. Isolation deepened. Interactions with townsfolk reduced to necessities, his reclusion fueling rumors of illness. Eliza visited concerned, sharing tales of her ancestors' similar experiences. Eliza the settler, whose visions led to seclusion, labeled eccentric but perhaps an early vessel. This connection fostered camaraderie, but also mirrored his path, amplifying the emotional isolation. A turning point came during a stormy April night, the confessional drawing him irresistibly. Sitting within, he experienced a partial convergence, not the full chorus, but a dialogue with his own echo, a voice mimicking his timbre, confessing doubts and regrets from his life. The forsaken love, vocational uncertainties, familial guilts amplified by Uncle Josiah's revelations. This self-confrontation was profoundly disturbing. A psychiatric hall of mirrors where the mind interrogated itself, revealing layers of suppression. Empathy turned inward, sorrow for his fractured self mingling with intrigue at the human psyche's complexity. How bindings weren't solely external, but internal constructs maintaining fragile equilibria. The experience left him shaken, emerging to find the church altered subtly. Shadows lingering longer, air heavier with unspoken presence. Father Callahan's physical form reflected the toll. Appetite waned. Sleep fragmented, a pallor suggesting inner depletion. He sought solace in prayer, but even there echoes intruded, blending divine communion with spectral residues. The town's history felt alive within him, a living archive where Margaret's love, Thomas's justice-seeking, Emily's purity coexisted with his essence. This fusion stirred a bittersweet acceptance. Perhaps becoming one wasn't demise but transcendence, the priest evolving into a guardian of memories. Yet fear persisted. What if the descent led to complete dissolution, his mind unraveling into the collective? Summer brought subtle escalations. During a parish event, he overheard whispers not from attendees but overlays, past voices commenting on present scenes, linking generations in uncanny continuity. A child's laughter evoked Emily, stirring joy tinged with loss. An argument mirrored Henry's jealousy, prompting unspoken interventions. These intrusions heightened his empathy, making him a more intuitive confessor but at the cost of personal boundaries. Journal entries grew erratic, blending narrative with poetic fragments reflecting a psyche in flux. Psychiatric self-analysis pointed to depersonalization, where the self felt detached, observed from afar, a common aftermath of intense empathetic immersion. As autumn approached, the echoes coalesced toward a new revelation, Silas's voice clearer now, hinting at the rite's final phase, a voluntary merging where the vessel chose to absorb or release the remnants. This choice loomed, suspense building as Father Callahan contemplated his fate, emotions layered deeply, regret for the solitude that made him vulnerable, intrigue at the mind's expansive potential, a profound sorrow for the human condition's inherent bindings. The descent continued, pulling him toward an horizon where priest and echoes intertwined, the story's enigma deepening into personal transformation. The church, once sanctuary, now vessel for his evolving mystery, promised a culmination that would redefine existence's fragile borders. The lingering echoes had evolved into an insistent hum within Father Daniel Callahan, a constant undercurrent that colored every thought and perception as the season cycled onward from that pivotal Christmas Eve in 1993. By the fall of 1994, Willow Creek had shed its winter cloak, blooming into a vibrant tapestry of changing leaves and harvest festivals. Yet for the priest, the world appeared through a veil of muted hues, as if the convergence had drained some vital essence from his senses. The church, once a bastion of solace, now felt like an extension of his own mind. A vast chamber where memories not his own reverberated softly, blending with his reflections until distinction blurred. He had hoped the ritual's completion would usher in clarity, but instead it initiated a gradual surrender, where the boundaries of self dissolved like ink in water, leaving him adrift in a sea of collective consciousness. Father Callahan's journal, once meticulous, now bore entries scrawled in hurried script, chronicling the merger's progression. Moments when Silas's pioneering resolve fortified his own during sermons, or Lydia's quiet resilience steadied him amid doubt. These infusions brought comfort at first, a sense of companionship in isolation, but as they deepened, empathy transformed into immersion, the priest feeling the weight of histories as acutely as his own. Daily routines became laced with subtle intrusions. While tending the graveyard, he paused over Margaret Hensley's stone, sensing not just her presence but her emotions, the unspoken longing for Thomas that mirrored his youthful regrets, stirring a melancholic kinship that lingered hours after. In the rectory kitchen, preparing a simple meal, Henry's remorse surfaced unbidden, prompting Father Callahan to reflect on his lapses in judgment. The small deceptions of priesthood life amplified into profound self-scrutiny. Even interactions with parishioners carried overlays. Consoling a grieving widow evoked his mother's gentle wisdom, her voice whispering guidance in his mind, fostering an uncanny intuition that drew people closer yet pushed him further into seclusion. The town whispered of his gift, attributing his insightful counsel to divine inspiration, oblivious to the psychiatric undercurrents eroding his autonomy. Father Callahan pondered this in solitary walks along the mill path, where Thomas's spirit seemed to walk beside him, sharing visions of untapped potential cut short, paralleling the priest's growing fear that his life was similarly constrained by unseen forces. The descent manifested in perceptual shifts that challenged his grip on reality. Colors in the stained glass windows appeared to shift independently, forming patterns reminiscent of the mandala, thorny crosses intertwining with roses, symbols from the rite that evoked a quiet horror at their persistence. Sounds carried hidden depths. The wind through trees mimicking Emily's laughter, a child's joy now his to bear, infusing moments with bittersweet nostalgia. Sleep brought immersive dreams, no longer fragmented but narrative continuums where he lived alternate lives. As Silas founding the town amid wilderness doubts, as Dr. Thorne analyzing minds fracturing under repression, as Uncle Josiah grappling with financial temptations that echoed familial patterns. Awakening, he carried residual emotions. Silas's determination bolstering his resolve, Thorne's analytical detachment aiding self-diagnosis, Josiah's regret fueling introspection. These dreams blurred into daydreams, the merger accelerating as if the vessel, having absorbed the echoes, now integrated them fully, the human mind's adaptability turning adaptive into transformative. Psychiatric reflections dominated his quieter hours. Borrowing more texts, he explored concepts of ego dissolution, where intense empathetic experiences, akin to deep meditation or therapeutic breakthroughs, could lead to a reconfiguration of self. The binding rite, in this lens, served as a cultural amplifier of such states, a folklore-fueled pathway to collective psyche integration. Father Callahan saw parallels in historical accounts of mystics and shamans, intermediaries who merged with communal spirits, their sanity questioned yet their insights revered. Empathy for these figures swelled, mirroring his journey. Vulnerability to the inexplicable, the mind's unpredictability when confronting the vastness of shared human experience. Yet fear crept in. What if this surrender led not to enlightenment but erasure, his identity subsumed into the chorus? The echoes responded subtly, affirming their gratitude while urging acceptance. Silas's voice prominent. The vessel becomes the river, carrying all streams to the sea. Compelled by this, Father Callahan revisited the confessional, not for ritual but communion. Sitting within, he invited the merger, whispering invitations that drew the remnants closer. The experience was profound, a symphony of essences flowing through him, each soul's essence imparting wisdom. Margaret's lesson in hidden passions, Thomas's call for justice in silence, Emily's reminder of innocence amid corruption. The emotional cascade was overwhelming, a flood of sorrow, intrigue, and connection that left him weeping in the dim light. His tears a release of accumulated burdens. Emerging, he felt expanded, as if his consciousness encompassed more than one lifetime. The merger granting perspectives that enriched his faith yet strained his mortal frame. Physical signs emerged, fatigue that no rest alleviated, a tremor in hands during Mass, eyes holding a distant gleam that unsettled visitors. As winter returned, marking a year since the first whisper, the surrender neared its apex. Voices, now internalized, guided daily decisions. Henry's caution tempering impulsivity, Lydia's endurance sustaining through ailments, his mother's love softening self-criticism. Father Callahan documented this evolution, his journal a testament to the mind's capacity for multiplicity, a psychiatric mosaic where dissociation yielded unity. Intrigue about the outcome grew. Whispers hinted at a final threshold, where full merger would transcend individuality, the priest becoming an eternal guardian of Willow Creek's soul. Empathy extended to the town itself, seeing residents as unwitting participants in the legacy, their lives threaded with subtle echoes he now perceived. A family's unexplained melancholy tied to embezzlement descendants, a child's intuitive dreams echoing Emily's purity. One crisp December evening, the confessional called once more. Father Callahan entered, sensing the culmination. The echoes converged internally, a gentle chorus affirming his role. You are the bridge, the vessel complete. Emotions peaked, fear of loss yielding to acceptance, sorrow for solitude transforming into fulfillment and unity. He surrendered fully, his mind opening like a bloom, absorbing the final fragments. Visions flooded, lifetimes interwoven, histories resolved in harmony. The merger sealed, his essence expanded beyond the booth, the church, the town, a timeless whisper carrying truths forward. In that moment, Father Callahan understood the rite's ultimate truth. Bindings weren't chains, but connections. The human mind a vessel for eternal stories, fragile yet infinite in its capacity to hold the inexplicable. The following days blurred, the priest's presence in Willow Creek fading subtly. Parishioners noted his serene detachment, sermons laced with profound insights that seemed drawn from beyond. He moved through life as a conduit, echoes guiding without overwhelming, the merger a quiet equilibrium. Yet the descent's shadow lingered, hinting at an eventual transcendence where the living vessel joined the chorus fully. The story's enigma deepened, the priest's journey a testament to the mind's depths, where confessions from the dead became his own eternal narrative, blurring lines between confessor and confessed in a tapestry of shared humanity. In the quiet aftermath of his ultimate surrender, Father Daniel Callahan's presence in Willow Creek began to fade like a whisper carried away on the wind, his form still walking the church halls but his essence now woven into the very fabric of the town's unspoken history. By the winter of 1995, the priest who had once stood as a pillar of faith had become something more elusive, a living echo, his eyes holding the depths of countless souls, his words laced with insights that seemed drawn from beyond the mortal coil. The confessional, once a gateway to the inexplicable, stood silent now, its lattice screen a relic of the bindings that had unraveled through him. Yet in that silence lay the profound truth of his journey. The human mind, in its boundless fragility, could stretch to encompass the echoes of the dead, blurring the lines between confessor and confessed until individuality dissolved into a collective tapestry of regrets, redemptions, and unresolved yearnings. Father Callahan didn't vanish in a dramatic flourish. Instead, he simply merged. Parishioners spoke of him in hushed tones, noting how he seemed to anticipate their deepest confessions before they were voiced, how his sermons evoked memories not their own, stirring emotions long buried. Some whispered that he had crossed over without leaving his body behind, becoming a vessel that carried the weight of Willow Creek's sins and sorrows forward, ensuring that the lessons of the past whispered eternally in the present. His story, rooted in the psychiatric enigma of voices from beyond, revealed the unpredictability of the soul, how faith could open doors to realms where justice wasn't meted out by courts, but by the relentless pull of unfinished truths. It challenged our perception of safety, reminding us that the barriers between life and death, sanity and the abyss, are as thin as a confessional screen, vulnerable to the slightest crack in our resolve. What began with a single rasping whisper in 1993 culminated in a profound transformation, where one man's confrontation with the dead illuminated the darkness within us all, forcing us to question, are we ever truly alone in our minds? Or do the echoes of others linger, waiting for the right vessel to set them free? This tale of Father Callahan isn't merely a recounting of bizarre events. It's a mirror held up to the human condition, exposing how the mind can fracture under the pressure of the inexplicable, how morality bends when confronted with secrets that defy rational explanation, and how vulnerability to the unknown is a thread that connects us across generations. In unraveling the Binding Rights legacy, from Silas Ward's frontier innovations to the 1950s scandal that ensnared Margaret, Thomas, Henry, and beyond, we see the mind's capacity for both repression and revelation, a delicate balance where guilt festers in silence until it demands to be heard. Father Callahan's descent into murder serves as a haunting reminder that justice often comes not from external forces, but from within, when we dare to listen to the whispers that others ignore. His story changes how we view our own safety, suggesting that the greatest threats aren't lurking in shadows, but in the unexamined corners of our psyches, where past sins echo and future reckonings await. It's a reflection on the fragility of identity, how empathy can expand us to the point of dissolution, turning isolation into interconnection in ways that both terrify and transform. By facing the dead's confessions, Callahan uncovered a truth few confront. The human mind is a vast, uncharted territory, capable of holding multitudes, but at the risk of losing the self in the process. This psychiatric odyssey, set against the backdrop of a small town's hidden darkness, invites us to ponder our own bindings, the regrets we suppress, the voices we silence, and wonder if, like him, we too might one day surrender to become part of something greater, or more haunting. Congratulations on making it to the end of this chilling journey into the depths of the human psyche. You've proven yourself part of a rare and resilient group, those who dare to stare into the abyss of the inexplicable without flinching, emerging with a deeper understanding of the shadows that shape us all. Not everyone can withstand the emotional weight of stories like Father Callahan's, where the line between the living and the echoes blurs until it's impossible to tell where one ends and the other begins. By staying with us through every twist, every whisper, and every revelation, you've joined an elite circle of truth seekers, those who recognize that true insight comes from confronting the uncomfortable, the unsettling, and the utterly profound. Pat yourself on the back. You've earned your place among those who refuse to let the darkness remain hidden. Now, to solidify your connection to this mystery and signal to others that you're one of the committed, drop a comment below with the phrase, "This story changed my way of seeing the human mind." By sharing those exact words, you'll identify yourself to our most dedicated followers, those who, like you, have delved into the enigma and come out transformed. Your comment isn't just a note, it's a beacon, helping to weave a tighter community of individuals united in their pursuit of the hidden truths that society shies away from. Together, through these shared reflections, we build a network of minds eager to decipher the inexplicable, supporting one another in explorations that challenge our very perceptions of reality. Imagine the power in that. A collective force uncovering what no one else dares to acknowledge. But don't stop there. The importance of sharing this video cannot be overstated. Think of it as casting a stone into a still pond. The ripples spread, drawing more souls into the circle of awareness, ensuring that stories like Father Callahan's don't fade into obscurity. By sharing, you're not just passing along a tale. You're extending an invitation to others to question their own mental boundaries, to ponder the echoes that might linger in their lives. In a world quick to dismiss the strange as delusion, your share becomes an act of quiet rebellion, illuminating the dark corners where truth hides. Help us ensure that these psychiatric enigmas reach those who need them most, the curious, the skeptical, the ones teetering on the edge of belief, so that no one remains blind to the vulnerabilities that bind us all. And if this story has left you with that lingering chill, that insatiable curiosity for the sinister and enigmatic, consider subscribing to the channel. Picture it as locking yourself into a dimly lit room where the walls whisper secrets you weren't meant to hear. Unsettling, yes, but irresistibly compelling, pulling you deeper into a world where the ordinary unravels into the extraordinary. Subscribing isn't just a click. It's stepping into a shadowed corridor lined with doors to the unknown, each one creaking open to reveal psychiatric cases that twist the mind like vines, strangling forgotten graves. You'll become part of an exclusive community, one that thrives on deciphering the inexplicable, where every notification is a summons to explore the bizarre without fear. Don't let the echoes fade. Keep them alive by hitting subscribe, ensuring you're always at the forefront of these disturbing discoveries. Finally, we invite you to continue watching our videos, feeding that inner hunger for the strange and the profound. Each episode is a step further into the tunnel of the human psyche, where curiosity doesn't just survive, it thrives, uncovering layers of mystery that redefine what you thought you knew about the mind. morality, and the fragile veil of safety. Stay with us and let the enigmatic pull you in deeper. There's always more to discover in the darkness. The end of Father Callahan's story isn't truly an end. It's an invitation to reflect on your own whispers, those faint echoes in the quiet moments that hint at truths waiting to be unbound. Thank you for joining us on this path. Until next time, keep listening to the silence.